Today we've reacted to a One Piece just video, first one, and Grandlinereveiw. I've been watching it for a minute. You know, he's a good ass fucking One Piece YouTuber. And fuck it, yeah, let's get into it.
After awakening Gear 5th and taking on the abilities of a cartoon sun man, it takes something pretty damn serious in this world to be worth Eiichiro Oda's time to draw standing up to Mr. Monkey D. Luffy. And I don't just mean physically seriously, I mean thematically seriously. And Marine Admiral Kizaru was perfect for this for many perfect reasons. One of which is the legacy of him being the primary reason why the Straw Hats were separated for 2 years, and we've covered a lot of that discussion in a different video on this channel. But if we're just looking at these two characters in isolation, then this is a battle of light versus dawn. We've got our sun god destined to bring about the dawn of the world being confronted by the very concept of light itself. In addition to that, this is also a mental battle of liberation versus enslavement. Luffy, a man who believes that anything is possible and is always pushing the boundaries of freedom, versus Kizaru, a man who, for all intents and purposes, has the physical ability to do exactly the same, but is resigned to his role in the world. A man whose will has been broken or perhaps never even existed, to the point where he states that even he, one of the most powerful characters in the world, is just another cog in the machine. Which is a very interesting setup. Kizaru is a surprisingly humble man, and we don't tend to see a lot of that with One Piece antagonists. However, Kizaru is probably too humble and with an extreme deficit of self-esteem. He's almost like a classic pre-time skip antagonist in regards to his broken will and complete subservience to the world in its current incarnation, and having a man with his abilities being a key agent of the world government is almost an insult to the concept of light and everything it's supposed to bring. It's like the world government has weaponized light to be used against those who it's intended for. And that's why Luffy here has to thematically set the record straight, because light is a theme that's been associated with Luffy ever since the very beginning of the series, and in fact even before that in the One Piece prototypes, which were called Romance Dawn. Luffy growing up, going on his adventure and becoming the Pirate King is the sunrise that this planet has been waiting for. And throughout this fight, Luffy does come out not conclusively, but pretty consistently on top. And there's even one moment in particular where Luffy uses a Dawn attack, a Dawn stab, to dispel all of Kizaru's light clones, which is a great instance of Dawn, the real deal light, overcoming all of these fake artificial representations of light. And I should say that Kizaru is also very well aware that he's a bit of a thematic fraud. Kizaru himself understands to some degree what the Gear 5th form represents. He was told about Nika by Kuma, and he even did the funky Nika dance in Kuma's flashback, and so Kizaru is much more well aware of what Luffy embodies than I think any opponent Luffy has gone up against to date. But even knowing that, unfortunately Kizaru is something of a life atheist in the One Piece world. The really sad thing about him is that he doesn't believe in anything. There's even a moment where Sanji stops Kizaru's light beam attack and says, "Love is stronger than light," to which Kizaru replies, "If that's true, then physics as we know it is dead," which is a fun line, haha, but it shows that Kizaru believes in a world of rigid rules, and that there isn't an abstract concept he's looking towards that can break those rules.
That's some shit only Sanji would say on my mama. And that shit's crazy as fuck. Love is stronger than light.
Which is something that not even the world's foremost authority on science adheres to. Dr. Vegapunk is very much open to the mysterious, and he consistently pushes the bounds of reality to create the impossible, which is important to point out because Vegapunk is Kizaru's best friend, and yet they have such completely opposite mindsets. Luffy here is the unstoppable force, and Kizaru is the immovable mass. Luffy refuses to accept anything the way it currently is if it impedes his freedom, and Kizaru refuses to accept that anything can ever change even if it improves or grants him freedom. Another way that Oda highlights this with...
He's doing his job for justice, and that's his job as a Navy Admiral, is to do that. And so whatever the government sees fit as justice, that's what his job is to do. And to him, he's just a humble, you know, he gonna get the job done type deal, you feel me? And like, from what he know is right from wrong, he know that Vegapunk and whatnot isn't the right, and he still had to take him off, kill his best friend and whatnot, because he known him for a crazy amount of years.
Kizaru is that he has a set of attacks based on the imperial regalia of Japan. 3 treasures that were brought to Earth by the ancestors of the imperial line. These being the Yatta no Kagami, the Yasukani no Magatama, and the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, all of which Kizaru has attacks based on, and he even has a move called Amaterasu, which is named after the sun goddess, the chief deity of the Shinto pantheon. So as a non-Japanese speaker, this concept may not come across quite as powerfully, but Kizaru embodies this very traditional old world order. There's a lot of history incorporated into Kizaru, lots. So much so that there doesn't seem to be any room left within him to consider the future. And he's fighting against Luffy, who yes, also has a lot of history attached to him, but he doesn't know it, and he rarely thinks about the past at all. With Luffy, it's all about living in the moment and continuing to move forward. It's a very evenly matched bout in that regard, the power of all history versus the infinite potential of the future. But it's also not a straightforward fight to judge in terms of an outcome. No, not at all. Generally in One Piece, when Luffy fights an antagonist, his goal is to beat them by punching them lots until they don't get up again. However, Luffy's goal was never to beat Kizaru on Egghead Island, just to stall him in order to allow Vegapunk to escape. And likewise, Kizaru's goal was never to beat Luffy, it was to slip past him and kill Vegapunk. So this isn't really a test of strength. Luffy wins this fight if Vegapunk escapes, and Kizaru wins the fight if Vegapunk dies. Although the definition of win that I'm using for Kizaru here is very liberal. Personally, I think that in Kizaru's position there was no option to win, or at least no option that he was willing to pursue. But even if Kizaru can't...
Either way, he's doing the right thing, but the wrong thing at the same time. Because for the government, it's the right thing. But to him, it's not the right thing, because he know what they doing is right. And he's killing his best friend at the same time. Like, you feel what I'm saying? It's fucked up in a whole different 1,000 scenarios.
When Luffy can definitely still lose, especially because Kizaru can also do a lot more than just physical damage. In addition to killing Dr. Vegapunk, Kizaru was also charged with destroying dreams. And the main moment of illustration of this is a very underrated moment during the fight, where Kizaru kicks Luffy into the Vega Force 1, destroying it. And I definitely don't think that this moment lands as hard as it should, but Kizaru did this on purpose to destroy the robot, because doing so would destroy Vegapunk's dreams. This robot was built using Emmet as a guide, at least the parts that were possible to recreate, and Vegapunk refers to the Vega Force 1 as the quote dream of mankind. Exactly why it's the dream of mankind isn't really explored beyond the Emmet connection, and I suppose it could represent a modern day step towards achieving the dream technology of the past. But in the color spread of chapter 1101, Eiichiro Oda drew all of the Vegapunks, and amongst them he made sure to include the Vega Force 1. It is such an important creation to Vegapunk that it was even included here like a 7th satellite, as if it represented the aspect of hope, or dreams, just straightforward dreams, and Kizaru made sure to eliminate that hope and dream as quickly as he could. And he knows that he's been a very bad boy here, because Kizaru even gloats by saying, "I've blown your so-called giant robot of dreams to smithereens." So the dude is a certified dream destroyer, he's a menace. But luckily, Luffy just so happens to be a licensed dream builder, as immediately after Kizaru gloats, giant Luffy appears and grabs Kizaru, which is a very purposeful juxtaposition by Oda. Kizaru gloating over destroying one dream giant, only for a real dream giant to step in to take its place and inherit that hope for the world. In the end, Luffy quite clearly wins the Battle of Dreams, because sure, Kizaru does kill Vegapunk, but in doing so, it unleashes his legacy onto the world, and it amplifies that dream beyond anything that Vegapunk could have hoped for in life. Meanwhile, there's also a second dream that Kizaru actively threatens, which is that of Bartholomew Kuma, by endangering and even attempting to kill Jewelry Bonnie. However, this is also a dream battle that Luffy wins, not only by managing to protect her, but also inspiring her to take on the Nika form herself. But in talking about Nika, we also need to discuss the liberation front of this fight. Despite his incredible power, Kizaru is one of the most trapped characters in the entire series, and he has very little to no willpower of his own to do anything about it, which is most evident in the fact that he's one of the very few top fighters on this planet who does not possess Conqueror's Haki, which is the ability to assert your willpower over others. According to the One Piece power system, Kizaru can only have the will of others asserted over him. Now, to be fair, it still needs needs to be a pretty damn powerful will, but if that will exists, then Kizaru has no defense against it. And throughout his time in the series, Kizaru has also shown an extreme external locus of control. His language very much focuses on what's happening around him and how those events force him to respond. He often says stuff like, well, this really puts me in a bind now, or some variation of that. Essentially, there's a complete lack of not personal responsibility, it's actually a lot worse than that. It's a complete lack of any personal agency. It's like Kizaru is a stationary existence as the world moves around him. Again, the exact opposite of Luffy, who never stops moving, even to the point where he moves the world around himself. And one of the most amazing moments during the fight is when Luffy reinforces this dynamic of willpower. He becomes a giant and says to Saint Saturn and Kizaru that you guys aren't going anywhere. This is Luffy exercising his own personal freedom whilst restricting Kizaru. That is a physical representation of how both Luffy and Kizaru see themselves. Kizaru in this panel is such a small, powerless individual whose terms of existence are dictated to him. And then you've got Luffy, who's this larger-than-life character who won't accept anyone telling him what to do. Even if it's a Marine Admiral or one of the 5 Elder Stars. Doesn't matter. I'll just become bigger and stronger and freer. And Kizaru is also quite impressed by Luffy's willpower. Early on in the fight, he states, I can see why you're the man who defeated Kaido. And what's important about this is that this happens before Luffy even uses Gear 5th. He's still on Gear 4th at this point, so Kizaru is not necessarily referring to physical strength because he's not showing anything special at the moment. Instead, Kizaru says very powerful stuff in recognition of Luffy's drive and the acknowledgement of evolution that Luffy has gone through since the last time they met. I imagine that most people who run into Kizaru and promptly lose to him aren't all that keen to fight him again. So it really says something that it was Luffy who chose to engage and start the fight. And in Kizaru, there was definitely the potential for a Katakuri situation to play out, where Katakuri was mentally liberated from the binds of perfection and feeling trapped under the immense weight of Big Mom by Luffy. And Kizaru had that opportunity as well, but he...
Bro, that Katakuri and Luffy fight, top 5 for sure.
Made a very different choice. During Kuma's flashback, there's a very interesting discussion surrounding what it means to lose free will. Kuma was pondering about what his life was going to be like after the completion of the process, and Vegapunk's explanation is as follows. Losing free will in this research project means losing all of the memories and human emotions you've gained to this point in your life, which I find fascinating, because Eiichiro Oda very clearly had this in mind while he was writing all of the major Egghead characters, Kizaru included. And throughout the arc, Kizaru loses neither his memories nor his emotions, and in fact, during every step of the way, he is reminiscing and regretting. He's always saying, oh, this is so difficult for me, oh, let's not drag this out. And the first thing he does when he encounters Bonnie is bring up the past, and Kizaru is also the one who gives us the Sentomaru flashback, but Kizaru even smiles and thinks back to how adorable Sentomaru was back then. The dude cannot stop remembering and emoting. And this even extends to the Straw Hats as well. When Kizaru reaches the lava phase, he says, the Straw Hat crew, we had some times together. So according to Vegapunk's definition, Kizaru does indeed have free will. Not only that, he has a lot of free will. During this arc, he's one of the characters who demonstrates most Vegapunk's definition of free will, meaning that Kizaru is actively choosing the path he's going down, even if it doesn't necessarily feel that way to him. And also in the free will discussion, Vegapunk added, however you might be following your orders from above at the moment, would you continue to do their bidding if they told you to kill a child? And for Kizaru, the answer to that question is yes, and mate, let's do it. If he was ordered to kill a child, he would 100% go for it, and we know this because we saw him flat out go for the kill with Juri Bonnie. He tried to slice her in half. This is not very nice. And that puts a very different spin on the Kizaru character. He's a man lying to himself. If you believe his words, and he has no real choice in what he's doing, but that's not true. He has every bit as much free will as everyone else on this island, and quite frankly, it's a bit embarrassing to claim to be trapped when a cyborg Kuma shows up and exercises free will to save Bonnie without having any memories, any emotions, or having any recognizable humanity left in him. Kizaru is trying to tell himself that he has less free will than a mindless, emotionless robot slave. But look, if Kuma can do it, then Kizaru can do it. However, Kizaru doesn't do it. fight. And that brings us to Floor Piece. One of my ongoing jokes while Egghead was being published was just how much time Kizaru was spending on that there floor. And we know that it's not because he was incapable of moving, it's because he refused to move. Because moving would require making a decision, and making a decision would be admitting that you've got the free will to make said decision. So for the most part, Kizaru just freezes. He's not like Luffy, who was brought down by exhaustion and started moving again the very second he could. And the reason why we know that Kizaru is faking his immobility to some degree is because in the SBS of Volume 110, Oda revealed that it was Kizaru who brought the food to Luffy so that he could eat and recover. In chapter 1103, he, Luffy, suddenly starts eating. Who on earth responded to Luffy's pleas for meat? Was it Sanji or Frankie who were nearby? Kizaru and Sentomaru were there too. It seems like nobody found out. In other words, their actions went unnoticed, like it was done at the speed of light. I don't know either. Speed of light. So this is Oda very playfully telling us that Kizaru was the one who did it, because he's the only one who was fast enough to get it done without being noticed. And the lack of clarity here is also intentional, because Kizaru's motto is of course unclear justice. So Oda's giving us this answer in a very unclear way, as is representative Kizaru. This is the most free will that Kizaru has ever displayed, and we didn't even see it in the actual manga. But in this moment, he made a meek choice to support liberation. A very confusing and of course unclear choice. Originally I thought that this may have been because he resigned himself to his fate, but at the very least he wanted to try and save Bonnie and Sentomaru. But shortly after that, he genuinely tries to kill Bonnie anyway, so I don't know. It's unclear as to what Kizaru was thinking here and why he chose this of all moments as the time to exercise an uncharacteristic display of free will. But this right here is what I mean by that Katakuri potential. There was a glimmer of hope there, a very clear potential turning point for Kizaru. But instead, he chose to keep going straight, just like light. Light can't change direction unless something knocks it in another direction. Kizaru was thematically locked in, and he just went back to what he was doing. And he does successfully complete his mission and kill Dr. Vegapunk as ordered. And after this, Kizaru stops making choices for the rest of the arc. He just lays completely motionless on a marine battleship and completely resigns what little free will he had remaining, allowing one of the most monumental events in world history to play out around him with no personal input. And so when the story of Egghead Island gets retold and passed down through the generations, Kizaru's role here will be incredibly minimized and eventually forgotten altogether. So Vegapunk died, however the true outcome of this fight still has yet to be made clear. It's all very unclear. Initially it did seem like Kizaru claimed what passes for victory here, as he did kill Vegapunk. However, by the end of Egghead Island, we do discover that all of his satellites did survive in their own way, even York. So everything that Vegapunk was does still exist in this world, just divided into a few different bits. But on top of that, though, on Elbaf it was revealed that the Straw Hats managed to escape with a, quote, perfect recreation of Vegapunk, something that isn't like the satellites. This is a perfect clone which Lilith plans to bring to life. So is Vegapunk dead? I have no idea, because his brain is still functioning as Punk records. He also has 6 parts of himself roaming the world, and a full-on clone about to be up and running. But is he alive? I don't know about that either. These kind of questions are very difficult to answer, which is why the outcome of Luffy versus Kizaru is at best unclear. However, the conclusion I would offer is that yes, Kizaru won the physical contest by killing Vegapunk, or his body at the very least. However, Luffy, being the very good son boy he is, managed to preserve Vegapunk's dream as well as his memory, and as the old saying goes, when does a man die? When he is forgotten. And even if the Vegapunk we know is truly gone, he certainly will not be forgotten for thousands of years, which is why the power of